Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. Happy Valentine's Day. It is our second reservation conversation of the year, and I'm so pleased we have such a lovely crowd because we were a little bit worried that everyone would be tied up, so I guess we're each other's Valentine's Days tonight. So if you don't know me, if I don't know you, I'm Patricia Blick. I'm the Executive Director of the Quapaw Quarter Association. And before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to make a couple of opening comments to recognize some folks, and then we'll get to our talk very quickly. First of all, I would like to introduce Callie. She's our membership and event coordinator. So if you are a member, if you're interested in being a member, you're going to interface with Callie. She helps with renewals as well. And that's another thing I always say is that you have an opportunity tonight to join the QQA if you are not a member. Our membership forms are in the back of the room at the table as you came in. So just take a look at it. Take one with you. We have several copies, so please consider joining the Quapaw Quarter Association. That's how we stay in business, is membership, membership-based organization. I also would like to recognize our landmark members. These are the members who donate to the QQA at the highest level. Ashley Ahrens and Kelly Bass, Calvin and Vita Biggers, David and Patricia Blick, Carl Miller Jr., Chuck Clyett, Jay Barth, Robert and Carolyn Nelson, Tricia and Leonard Peacock, Lizanne Rockefeller, and John and Gina Silva. And then also our corporate partners. These are organizations all within our general proximity that support us as well. Ace Glass, Capital Zoning Commission, Cathedral of St. Andrew, Community Bakery, EBO Business Solutions, Hall Engineering, Haybar Properties, Poe Travel, Arkansas Children's Hospital, Stone's Throw Brewing, Clark Exterminating Company, Cromwell and Associates, Downtown Little Rock Partnership, Edwards Cash Saver, Witzel Evans and Rasco, Arkansas Democrat Gazette, Bray Sheet Metal, Catlett Tower Partnership, Copeland and Hardy, United Realty, and very recently Rogue Architecture. And I also must note, though it's anonymous, we did receive a gift in honor of Carl Miller to help underwrite some of the costs associated with holding our preservation conversations this year. So we're really, really honored by that gift. The other thing I'm going to do is just sort of put in your mind that the spring tour is coming up. And I think many of you, as you came in, saw a sign-up sheet at the table. And if you're interested in volunteering for the spring tour, we need about 150 to 200 volunteers. We're getting ramped up, so please put your name and contact information down, and we will find a place for you. And it could be a small commitment, or it could be a very big commitment. There are many opportunities to volunteer. The tour this year, of course, is going to be Mother's Day weekend, and it's the MacArthur Park Historic District. So sort of the oldest historic district, or what I would say is our first historic district. Not by a long amount of time, but it is our first historic district, and of course very significant and very closely tied to the history of the Quapaw Quarter Association as well. Finally, I'm going to get to introducing our speaker. I'm really, really honored and pleased to introduce you to Callie Williams, our speaker tonight. Callie is a native of Arkansas and graduated from the University of Arkansas in 2008 with a Bachelors of Science in Architectural Studies. In 2010, she earned a Master's in Architectural History from the University of Virginia. As part of her graduate requirements, she completed a thesis entitled Euine Fay Jones. I always say E. Fay Jones, now I know why, right? Architecture is invention, is innovation, but is also remembering. After completing her graduate degree, she worked as the University of Virginia Registrar aboard the Semester at Sea Spring 2011 voyage around the world. In 2011, Callie returned to Arkansas and now works for AHPP as the Education and Outreach Coordinator. She has worked with individuals and groups across the state to identify, research, and nominate historic structures to the National Register of Historic Places. Please welcome Callie. I'm really honored to be able to work with her and know her. Thank you. And I'll just say too, please feel free to continue to eat and drink, and if you need to use the restroom, it's outside. Just go out this door, turn to your left, and then it's on your right.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us on Valentine's Day. And I did ask Patricia when she asked me to do this, I'm like, you know it's Valentine's Day, right? And she's like, I know. So here we all are together. I am going to talk a little bit about talk tonight about the National Register of Historic Places, kind of what led up to the creation of the National Register of Historic Places, and some of the ways that we deal with the National Register in Arkansas, kind of how that process works for our state. It is different in kind of every state, but how it works in our state. And then talk a little bit about the resources we use to research historic properties. Before we get started, I do want to point to the front table. So after the talk, if you'd like to pick up some literature from our office, the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, please feel free to come up. There are driving tours. There are also some good information. And I wanted to point you toward two programs that we currently have ongoing. Our National Register Passport Program, which has several places across the state that are listed in the National Register that you can visit and get a stamp at, and then submit it back to our office, and we have some prizes for those who do, which are pretty nifty. And then we're doing our 2019 Sandwiching in History and Walks Through History tours through our department, and we now have brochures, which have been a long time coming. So if you want to find out more about that program, I have these brochures up front as well. As Patricia noted, I'm now the Education and Outreach Coordinator. That's actually a new title for me. I used to be the National Register Historian, and so that was my role for the last 5 years, was to help individuals and groups work through the process to get their building listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And before we get too much into the talk, I do want to note, and I'm going to show you our website, which does include the link to every National Register property and Arkansas Register property in the state of Arkansas. We have a lot. So it's really good so you can see where you can go to search that on our website. And I'm going to pull that up here just right now. So arkansaspreservation.com is our website. And if you go to Properties, National Register of Historic Places, and click, you can search the National Register listings of all across Arkansas. And I'm just going to put in I'm just going to scroll down here just to show you. This is just me putting in Little Rock. We have a lot. And I think it may still be true, but I do believe Little Rock still has one of the records for having the most historic districts. I think it's west of the Mississippi in a town of our size. So we do have lots and lots of properties in Arkansas that are listed on the National Register. And I'll quit scrolling, but we've only got to the C's. So you can see that there are a lot of properties that have been deemed historic and have had the research done on them to be listed in the National Register, just in Little Rock and across the state. So again, this is the website, and I also have up here tonight with me, and you can come up afterwards and feel free to pick it up. I do have what we have called our Resources for Researching Historic Properties. And it's basically a 2-page handout, or one front and back, that lists a good checklist if you're getting into the business or getting into the habit of looking at your historic properties or looking at any property in Arkansas to find out some of the things about it. It's a really good list of resources, and I'm going to go through some of these toward the end of the program, but just know that this is available, so don't feel like you have to remember everything that's in this slideshow or try to write it down. It's all on this page as well, and these are available up here at the front as well. The idea of preservation in the United States has a pretty long history, and I think it's longer than a lot of people realize. Of course, in other places such as Europe and in other countries, they have a much longer history for one thing, and a much longer history of preservation and of deeming things of importance and things that should be kept by the country and kept at certain levels of preservation. For the United States, Mount Vernon is really picked out as kind of the beginning of the preservation movement. There were obviously some things before this, but this is seen as really the biggest touchstone for preservation in the United States. And that happened because, Mount Vernon, owned by George Washington, went through several of his family members, but by 1859 was in a complete state of disrepair. The surviving Washington family member, who was a grandson, I believe, approached the United States government and said, "Please take this. This is a really important place. Please take this over." He was running out of money, and they were coming up to the Civil War and said, "No, thank you. We don't have time to do this." He also approached the Virginia government and said, "Please, take this. Somebody take this." And they were again coming up to the Civil War and saying, "We can't deal with this." So the Mount Vernon's Ladies Association was formed, and in 1860 they purchased the property and opened it to the public, and have since run the property open to the public since that time, and have taken no federal money and no government money. It's just been run by their association and their fundraising. So this was really the kind of first success in preservation in the United States, and kind of made people think, what are these sites across the country that we want to keep and we want to preserve? Again, we went through the Civil War that obviously destroyed a lot of places and didn't preserve much. But by the early 1900s, there was a movement to again say, okay, there are things that we want to preserve as a country. And in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act. If you're a fan of West Wing, you may have heard of the Antiquities Act, because there's a really great episode that hinges on it. But it really does, it created a way for the president to say, this place is important, and these places should be protected. So it gave the president some power to create national monuments. So think Devil's Tower, Grand Canyon, some of these big famous monuments. It didn't have a lot of teeth in it. It was really just a way to say, this place is important. This was followed by kind of an inspiration for several to kind of create this conservation movement. So this is when we get into the idea of preserving places of natural beauty and of natural importance. And this kind of culminated in the creation of the National Park Service in 1916. This was founded by President Woodrow Wilson. Actually, the Department of the Interior had existed well before then. It was created in 1849. But the Department of the Interior was not like it is today. It basically got the name of the Department of Everything Else. So the Constitution laid out certain departments that had to exist, Department of War, things like that. But it didn't say what you were supposed to do with all the stuff inside the United States. And so Congress in 1849 said, okay, we need somebody to take control of all of these different things that happen inside the United States. And they were given basically every other power that nobody else had. So they had power over mines and land and taking over mine safety and even things in the territories, Indian removals, all of this stuff fell under the Department of the Interior. But by the early 1900s, many of these early departments had kind of gotten farmed out. So the Department of the Interior became mostly about resources, protecting the natural resources. And now what it kind of is today, where it's more about the landscape and the land, and the National Park Service is a very large part of that department. In 1933, as we're entering into the Great Depression, and things are just really slow in the United States for the building trades, the Historic American Building Survey was created, originally to be a temporary way to put architects and those who draw, and designers and photographers to work. We wanted to get them out there and doing something, and one of the ideas that was come up with was, let's let them go out there and measure and draw and photograph and record historic sites. We're losing them. Some of them are going to be gone. They're facing disrepair in lots of places. Let's get out there and record them. This is a great resource. We have these sites all across Arkansas. There are a lot that were recorded in the 30s, like this one. This one was done in 1934 at the Hinderleiter Grog Shop, which is now at the Historic Arkansas Museum. But it captures it in a really amazing moment in time. This was supposed to be a temporary program just meant for relief. But in 1935, the Historic Sites Act was created. This did lots of little things. It kind of was a precursor to what would be the 1966 Historic Preservation Act, but it didn't give anybody teeth. It didn't let them actually enforce anything. It basically said, these places are important, we should record them. And it also was kind of the first attempt to make a national policy for preservation. Like, there is a reason to preserve these places, it just didn't figure out how to do it yet. But one of the amazing things that it did do was it established the Historic American Building Survey, what we call HABS, as a permanent program. So that has been going on since then, and we still have HABS documented buildings in the state. In fact, I just found out yesterday that a group of university students from the University of Arkansas won the national prize for their HABS drawing of a Fay Jones house in Fayetteville this year. So it's still an ongoing program, and we still have lots of great sites in Arkansas that are captured by this program. In 1960s, there was beginning to be a larger national focus and push for historic preservation. The image you see here is Pennsylvania Station, and this is one of the other large touchstones for preservation in the United States. This is one of the buildings that we lost. This is one of the buildings that there was a huge fight to save, and it just did not get saved. So what's happening in the United States at this time is that there's a lot of white flight into the suburbs. There's the decays of downtown areas. There's revitalization, which I'm putting in big air quotes because we're also going to say urban renewal in big air quotes, at this time period too, where people are demolishing historic areas, demolishing historic downtowns to make way for progress, to make way for new buildings, or what they thought would be new buildings. This was not always successful. Sometimes it is. North Little Rock went through a period of urban renewal, and you do get some places that were used for public use, like where the library is. But other places, like think about Charlottesville, Virginia, they had urban renewal, and they had about 6 acres that sat empty since then. They built the Staples there about 3 years ago. Like, it did not succeed. It just created a big open space. You also have after World War II, you have the income of the highway expansion. You can think about it in Little Rock, where we have US 630 that went through this middle of town and took out historic districts. You also have community planning changes. So this is when we get uniform road widths, setbacks on houses, and the automobile is now everywhere. So a lot of these historic structures that have come before are being impacted by these changes in the way that we live and are being lost. Penn Station in New York was one of those. It was demolished from 1963 to 1966. And also, there was a big push at this time to say, okay, we can't have everything be like Penn Station. Like, these are important places, we need to save them. So President Johnson issued he created a committee to study preservation in the United States. And they created a report on what that looks like. And they basically went to the HABS program and looked at the HABS program, and out of the 12,000 places documented by HABS till then, by 1966, half had been damaged beyond repair or lost. So there was a phrase in the report that also said that the HABS program was like a death mask for the United States. It was all of the things that we've lost since then. So this brings us to the Historic Preservation Act of 1966. It was passed and it created the National Register of Historic Places, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, which is a state-by-state list of important historical, architectural, and archaeological properties, and was created to be a joint effort by states, citizens, and the federal government to provide some sort of oversight for these historic sites. It also created the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation that would draw up federal policies and guidelines to resolve the conflicts that would obviously arise because of historic properties being in the way of progress or in the way of projects. It also started the Section 106 process. Section 106 or 106 gets referred to a lot in historic preservation, and it's basically because of this law. This is where that Section 106 actually is. And it lays out the process for taking historic properties into consideration in federal projects. So if you've ever had anybody tell you about the National Register and say, oh no, it's listed on the National Register, you can't do anything, this is part of the reason that unfortunate myth gets circulated. You have to take it into consideration, but the only people who have to take it into consideration are the federal government. Local things don't have to take historic properties into consideration under this law, but the federal government does. And sometimes that taking into consideration is still tear down the building. It's just you have to do something to make up for that effect on a historic property. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but this is where that kind of myth of you can't change anything about a historic property, I think, kind of comes from. The Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, which I'm a part of, is the group in Arkansas that has been designated as the group that controls the National Register in our state. So each state has its own group that controls the National Register. Sometimes this is a state office, sometimes it's a state and private partnership. They're all considered what we call SHPOs, or State Historic Preservation Offices or officers. So every state has one and every territory has one. And it's the person in the group that is in charge of creating the process for these things to get listed. There is a federal process for things to be identified, evaluated, and registered, and our office is the one that helps people go through that process. As I said, it was our country's list of significant sites worthy of preservation. It's also an honorary designation. and this is what some people don't understand, and we'll talk a little bit about myths later, but being an honorary designation, the way that we kind of look at it is it's more about opportunities and incentives rather than restrictions. Because the only restrictions that get placed on these things are locally done, local restrictions. Buildings should be or need to be at least 50 years old, though this is not a hard and fast rule. It is for most places, but there have been buildings and places in the United States and in Arkansas that have been listed on the National Register that are less than 50 years old. One of the most famous is probably Thorn Crown Chapel, designed by Fay Jones, and it was listed at only 25 years old, but it was also considered one of the top 10 buildings of the 20th century by the American Institute of Architects, so it had a really good pedigree to get on there before it was 50. We'll also talk a little bit about this a little bit more, but integrity of location, design, setting, materials, and workmanship are all kind of the things that the National Register wants to be sure that buildings have to be listed. So this basically means, in a very small nutshell, it should appear and feel like it did historically for it to still be eligible for the National Register. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. The Arkansas, like many states, has the National Register program, but we also have a local state register program called the Arkansas Register of Historic Places. This is for properties that are not necessarily eligible for the National Register for one reason or another. Sometimes it's because they've been moved or they've been treated a little badly in their past and have some issues. They maybe have some unsympathetic alterations or additions, and just things that we know the National Park Service is just not going to like if we try to do National Register eligibility on it. These are two examples in Arkansas. One of the things in Arkansas that really hurts some buildings is synthetic siding or later siding on a building. This is something that can change radically the appearance of a building, and so some buildings on the Arkansas Register are listed for that reason. We also have National Historic Landmarks in Arkansas. Basically, this is the step up from the National Register. This is a program that was started with the 1935 Historic Sites Act, and it was a list of sites across the country that were deemed of great importance to the nation and the nation's history. And so that list from 1935 was kind of added into the law in 1966 and created the National Historic Landmarks list. So it's these sites and buildings that are just amazingly significant or can be proved to be amazingly significant in the United States history, not just Arkansas history. There are fewer than 2,500 in the country that bear this distinction, and we have 25. We actually just got one recently, and it's the USS Hoga that's now beside the USS Razorback down at the Arkansas River. It was listed in the as a National Historic Landmark in 1989 for its role at the World War II operations at Pearl Harbor. It was one of the tugboats that helped move vessels out of the way right after the Pearl Harbor attack. So it's just recently come to us, even though it was already listed as a National Historic Landmark. Here are two other examples in Arkansas. The Rower Relocation Cemetery in Rower and the Central High School site here in town. Obviously, that one was because of its focus of attention during the desegregation crisis in 1957. So what types of properties are eligible for being in the National Register? There's a wide range of possibilities for being on the National Register. Of course, buildings are an integral part of the National Register, and many of the sites that are on the National Register are buildings. Houses, barns, stores, courthouses, churches, basically anything a human can inhabit is a building. We also have objects. Think of sculptures, property markers, statues, fountains. The hoo-hoo marker in Gordon is one of my favorite because not many people know about it. It's a great little Egyptian revival monument to a group that was just kind of crazy. Definitely go read the Arkansas Encyclopedia article on them. This category also covers a lot of things that you might see on courthouse lawns. So veterans memorials, statues, lots of things at the Arkansas Capitol, the statues that surround the Capitol are listed under this category.
Where was that one on the left?
It's in Gurdon, 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 Arkansas. The Hoo-Hoos were a secret organization that were crazy.
So what is that? What is the age of it? What is that vintage?
It's 19 teens, 20s. It's a pretty early, it was a fraternal group, but I think they were kind of making fun of fraternal groups, basically. Definitely read the Arkansas Encyclopedia article on it. Sites can be listed on the National Register, so this can be places that don't have buildings, and things that are like designed landscapes, archaeological ruins, battlefields, cemeteries. We have quite a few cemeteries, quite a few battlefields. Structures, canals, grain elevators. We have 2 railroad tunnels that are listed, several bridges, a couple of fire towers, boats, as I said, the USS Hoga, USS Razorback. Districts are a different animal, and this is a way that the National Park Service determined that we could list multiple properties at one go. So districts are a way for us to say this area or this place is important, and these are all of the structures that make that place feel like a historic place. It's a very broad way to say it, but what you're looking at is a farmstead and a historic downtown. Farmsteads are often listed as district because they include lots of different resource types. Like there could be a barn, there could be a house, there could be a well, there could be all kinds of animal structures. So we list those all at once rather than going through and listing each one individually. When we look at these different types of properties, we're looking at 4 different criteria that the National Park Service has established. And these are those 4 criteria. A, associated with historic context, event, or theme. So basically, why is it important for an event or some important thing that happened there. B, associated with a significant person. So this is the George Washington lived there category. This is actually one that doesn't get used that often because the associated with a significant person really does need to be associated with their productive life. It's not because they were born there and it's not because they died there, it's because they did something important while they were there. So think about a really important senator lived there during his lifetime. Well, that's like Robinson's house. Someone, really important local doctor, lived at this place and had his office there. So that's associated with a significant person. Exemplary design or architecture, this is also the craftsman or architect category. This is where most things get listed under because there are important examples of a style or a type of architecture. And then D, has potential to yield information important in history or prehistory. This is the archaeological category. So this is the category that a lot of things get lumped into when they have the ability to tell us more about our history, and maybe it's even stuff we don't know to ask yet. So it could be an archaeological site that we just know there's really good stuff there, we just don't know how to get to it yet. And so it's important for us to keep it preserved so that later when those ideas and ways of researching come available, then we can get that information. This also applies to cemeteries as well. There's so many cemeteries that need so much additional research on them, and it could tell us so much more about the people who live there. We just can't get to it. There's no way to do that. And so they are important because of the information they could yield in the future as well. So criteria A, associated with historic event. This is the Drennan Scott site in Van Buren, associated with John Drennan's role in 19th century Indian affairs. It's a very important site. B, association with an important person. This is the Bob Burns House in Van Buren in Crawford County. And performer Bob Burns in the area of music, invention, and theater. If you don't know who he is, also look him up because he's really funny. And he's the reason that the bazooka is named for the bazooka. Because he had a musical instrument that he created and was so famous for that the Army decided to name their new weapon after his instrument. So, significant architecture or craftsmanship. This is the Greenwood Presbyterian Church in Sebastian County. And it's a great example of a vernacular Gothic revival small church. And then archaeological value. This is an Edgemont Celtic site, rock art site. One thing about archaeological sites is you can look them up on our website and you can find out more information about them. We will not tell you where they are. So, most of the archaeological sites in Arkansas are protected so that they do not have looting and they do not have people who visit who would do bad things. So we do restrict some information on those sites. We mentioned this a little bit before, historic integrity. This is a very important issue when we look at National Register of Historic Places eligibility. The building really does need to have the same feeling and association that it did in the past. One of the ways that I like to describe this to people is if somebody who lived in this house when it was built time traveled and came back today, and looked at this house, would they be able to recognize it? The one on the left, probably so. They would walk up the street and say, that's my house. The one on the right, probably not. The concrete block is a little bit much. This is subjective, and we do know this, and we get questions about this all the time. And there's a group of people at our office that try to look at these and really look at it from every perspective. When we get National Register nominations or National Register information, we do try to take it from every perspective, but sometimes it is just too much to be listed on the National Register if it's changed too much. So basically, for a property to be eligible for the National Register, it has to be something. It has to be a building or an object or a structure or a site or a district. It has to be at least 50 years old in most cases. And it has to retain enough of its design features and materials to reflect what it was significant for. And it has to be significant in some way. Not every example of a ranch house is significant. Almost all of them are about to turn 50 years old, though. So this is where we're getting into some issues of what is the significance. It's important maybe because somebody important lived there. It's important maybe because the neighborhood was first for some reason. Think Broadmoor in Little Rock. It was actually considered the first neighborhood to have inside air conditioning when it was created. Like, it was marketed as the first national place to have air conditioning built in all the homes. You didn't have to install it, they came with your house. So we're looking for significance, not necessarily that it's an example of. So, 3 myths of National Register listing. You can't change the building. Yes, you can. This really only applies, you can't change the building, if there are some local guidelines, ordinances, an overlay district that affects your building in your town. These are actually very rare. There are not very many towns throughout the Arkansas that have them. Little Rock does. They do have capital zoning. They have some other ordinances that do cover that. Eureka Springs does. It's a National Historic Landmark. The city itself is. Fayetteville does have some, and there are some other cities that have them, but it's not built into the federal law. The federal government can't tell you what to do with your house, and the state government can't really either. So there are a few conditions to that. If you have donated an easement on your property, then yes, the state does have a say in that. And if you've ever gotten a grant, if you're a nonprofit and your nonprofit has gotten a grant from our office, we do require an easement as well. So then again, we have a tie to that property because we've given tax dollars to go to that property. So there are a few exceptions, but in general rule, if it's listed, then you can still do whatever you want to with the property. Upkeep is mandatory. We wish. I would love to be able to say that you have to keep your house to a certain standard. Unfortunately, that is not written in the law. That is local code enforcement, that is local laws, and that is up to the city, up to the county. That is not up to us. Sideline to that, we can't tell you what color to paint your house. I get calls about this about every other month. I want to change the color of my house. Can I? Yes, you can. Please do. But we do want to know about buildings when buildings change. It is important for our office because there is a process to delist buildings if they are changed too much. And that can affect the things you might be eligible for. So the tax credits, the easement programs, incentive programs that might go along with being National Register listed can go away if you change the building too much. Listed properties must be open for tours. I'm not sure where this comes from, but we get this question all the time. We love people to show off their historic homes. We want them to be open to tours so people can see. We can't force you to do that. It's not in the law. There's nothing that says you have to open your home. Benefits for listing the National Register. We've noted a couple of these. One of the biggest ones is publicity, especially for local historic districts. When a new district gets listed, we do a big press release. We get the media involved. We want that to be exciting. We want people to know about it. Lakeview Historic District in Phillips County, which was just recently listed. You may not even know what Lakeview is, but we did a huge press release and wanted the people to know this was an important 1930s community of African Americans that was created by the federal government, just like Dice, where Johnny Cash grew up. Same program, but for African Americans. And it was an important place, and it's been listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Increased knowledge and pride in local history. We also see an increase in property taxes often when things get listed on the National Register. We also see, or property values, not taxes, excuse Limited protection from federally funded projects. As I said, the federal government does have to take into account historic properties, and one way that they know a historic property is there is because it's listed in the National Register of Historic Places. They are required to ask our office if they're going to impact things when they spend federal money in an area. And then we draw a circle around it and say, here are all the things in that area you're going to impact. So that is one way to have some limited protection. Available of state and federal tax credits, and this is a big incentive. There are tax credits available for National Register listed properties in districts and individually. The state tax credit covers basically any building, and the federal one covers income producing buildings. So this is a great resource, especially for commercial projects. Grant money. Our office does offer grant funding. They offer it for nonprofit or publicly owned individuals or groups. So if you have a building that's owned by a nonprofit or like a state, or like the county government or a city government, then we can offer them grant funding. And easements. This is again a voluntary thing that you can do if it's listed on the National Register, and you do get a tax write-off for that. Steps to listing in the National Register. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Most of this is on our website, but just so you know the basic steps that we go through when we look at a National Register property. Most people call our office and say, I want to be on the National Register, how can I get that going? What do I need to do? This is my address, what's the first step? We say, please fill out the determination of eligibility form. I have some of these with me tonight. If you're interested, I can give them to you, but they're also available on our website. It's basically a list of questions that our office asks so that we can figure out what you know about the building and what we need to find out to see if it's eligible. It's pretty basic. It's just tell us who owns it, where it's located, what history do you have, and we also request photographs, current photographs of the property. Once this is submitted, then we have a staff that looks at it and says, okay, here's the questions we need to have answered first, or we say yes or no. One of the reasons we do the determination of eligibility is because we don't want to waste your time. The process can take up to a year, and we figured that it's about 100 hours of work, depending on the site, to do a National Register nomination in terms of research, doing all of the steps, making sure all the stuff's together. Our staff obviously helps do this part of the process, or do parts of the process, but we don't want you to waste your time if it's something that's just never going to be eligible. Or we want to focus your research. If we think it's eligible for this reason, X, we want you to focus on just that instead of maybe the entire history of a structure. The next thing we'll do is come out and do a site visit. And if it's determined eligible, we'll set up a time to take photographs and make sure we have all of that information that we need to submit with the form at the final time. The nomination form, we ask the constituent who provides the original determination of eligibility, or whoever the person who is in charge of that nomination form for that structure, to do a draft. We want to see what you know, because you're going to know your building better than anybody else. And we want to have that information first before we help you add to it. We provide a lot of technical support. We want to be sure that you are getting the best information in there and it has the best chance of going forward to the state review board meeting. Because the state review board meeting is the yes or no vote to have it approved and sent on to the National Park Service. The completed form, we help you get it to that completed state, and then we send it to the state review board, and then it's scheduled for that board, and then they get a chance to read it and vote on it. If they vote yes, it gets sent to the National Park Service, and they have a very short period of time, it's about 45 days, to review those nominations, and if they say yes, then it's listed officially in the National Register of Historic Places. Once it's listed, then there are a few other things. You can get a certificate signed by the governor. So there are some nice little perks at the end. At least you get a certificate. And that's also when it becomes officially listed, is when you become eligible for some of those incentive programs. I'm also going to go through this pretty quickly. We do offer a much more in-depth, this is how you write a National Register nomination from our office. We do those twice a year. We do them in April and September. And so if you want more information about that, give me a call, but I'm just going to show you the parts of the form that are the most informative. These are all the different sections. These are the only three that really have deep historical information in them. Section 7, Section 8, and Section 9. Section 7 is where we describe the building. This is the place where we do the physical architectural information. And we want to know what it looks like, what it's made out of, how tall it is, how many rooms does it have, how many floors, what's the outside look like, what's the inside look like. This is so that in the future, if something horrible happens, we still have this information. Photographs can't tell us all this information. But this part of the form can tell us, how did this go together? What was it made out of? What was the foundation made out of? All of that kind of information. The section 8 is actually the historical narrative. So this is where we actually write the history of the building. We start with a short context, and then usually go into why is this building significant? What makes this place an important historical place? I've shown you a few pictures here. This is the Billings Coal House in Malvern. If you notice, there's a little door on the ground floor of the basement area. This was actually built to be a doctor's office and residence. Local doctor lived here, and then the local eye doctor then lived here. Also, at one time, the basement was turned into kind of a family bar, where they had a really nice wet bar and lounge area downstairs for a time. It was pretty fantastic. But this research on this particular building was fascinating because it showed us so many different aspects of the town of Malvern, all of the medical history that went on, all of the amazing people who were in Malvern, and the architects. This is architects from Hot Springs, so pretty close. But we were able to find the drawings for this building in the special collections at the University of Arkansas. Didn't know they were there when we started this project, but we found them, so it was kind of an amazing set of circumstances. And then section 9 is also very important because it is the place that we record all of the biographical or bibliographical information. I'm also going to go through and show you a few of the places that we get information. Again, there's going to be a lot of information in these slides. It is all in this handout that I have up here, so don't freak out. When doing research for National Register properties, architectural history is so fascinating because it hinges on every other piece of history that you can imagine. Buildings are important because people lived in them, and they are fantastic because they are records of their time and place. So we have to look everywhere for information to figure out buildings and why they're important. General information is obviously available from our website. You can see all of the National Register database. You can also call us and email us. We have an internal database of about 42,000 at this point, sites and structure forms. So these are not all buildings that are listed on the National Register. These are just buildings that we've gone out and surveyed and captured historical information about. And a lot of these are things like in historic districts or places that will never be eligible for the National Register but are still important historically. So who knows, we could have that information already before you start looking for it. So it's important to contact our office to see, and usually if you have a physical location or physical address, we can look it up without a problem. Obviously, interviews with property owners, churches, pastors, historians, your local tax records, local society or museum, historical society journals. All of these are important and very basic ways of doing historical research. Like I said, local journals. Almost every county in the state of Arkansas has had at some point a local historical journal. Most of them are kept at the Butler Center in the Arkansas State Archives. We are lucky in Arkansas that we have the Arkansas Encyclopedia, and it is growing by the day. It is a fantastic resource, and it has amazing history in it. And I urge you, if you have any question about Arkansas history, check here first, because it may already be there. And our office is working to keep adding to it. So every time we try to do a National Register nomination, we try to kind of also do a Arkansas Encyclopedia article. And we also try to do them on architects. We try to do them on local historical figures of importance. So it's growing and growing. And the Central Arkansas Library System, this is fantastic. The Butler Center, Arkansas Studies Institute in Arkansas, also great resources, and they also have the QQA files at the Butler Center. The QQA has a deep resource on historic buildings that are in their area, so in Central Arkansas, and they have them mostly by address, so you can go and research there. If it's ever been on tour before, if it's ever had any newspaper clippings clipped out about it, it's a fantastic resource. And that's at the Arkansas Studies Institute at the Butler Center. These are listed on that handout as well, but the one that I will point out that's really fantastic is the Arkansas post offices from Memdag to Norsk. Those are 2 town names in Arkansas, and it is fantastic. Russell P. Baker went through and got all of the old post office names for all of Arkansas, going back to the beginning of Arkansas. So anytime you find a name for a city or place that doesn't seem familiar, it's probably in that book, because it doesn't exist anymore. And it is a fantastic resource. Like I said, the Arkansas Studies Institute and the Butler Center has amazing collections, and they are deep. These 2 here on the left, that is a Lutheran church in Fort Smith, and that is them laying the cornerstone for the Lutheran church in Fort Smith. I don't think the Lutheran church knew these existed until we worked on their National Register nomination and found them. Somebody had donated them back many years ago, and they had them in their collection. So it's amazing what you can find that people don't realize. And they have lots of architectural drawings there as well that people have donated over time. And they have many historic photograph collections, including a postcard collection for Arkansas that's fantastic. Even one postcard collection and picture collection about disasters in Arkansas. When I was doing research on Brinkley and their 1909 tornado, they had the pictures. So it's a really great resource. Sanborn maps are also a very fantastic resource. Most of these are available at your local library. The Central Arkansas Library System now has a collection where you can do it through satellite imagery. It's called the Fire Insurance Maps Online database through their website. I think you have to be at the library to do it, but it's a fantastic resource. This is actually a plot for North Little Rock. You can see here in 1939, and then all of the houses that were built there between 39 and 1950. It's a great resource, and it also tells you what the house is made of, how big it is, what the footprint is, sometimes how tall it is, because these were created as fire insurance maps. So they were created for local fire insurance people who were selling insurance to be able to say, oh, well, that's a really combustible house next door to like 5 other combustible houses. Maybe we're not going to sell them insurance. So it's a great resource.
So they have those for all of Arkansas that counts?
It's basically most major cities. Major cities also includes a lot of the smaller cities. It's really worth just asking if they have them, because there are places like Winslow in Washington County, which I think has about 200 people in it now, that has fire insurance maps for it from the 1890s through 1920s. So it really does cover a wide range of towns in Arkansas. City directories, you may also know these as phone books. For people my age, don't even really have phone books anymore. But city directories are fantastic. They existed before the phone existed. So they listed the person's name and the address. And usually they listed it by person's name and by address. So you can cross-reference these for many, many years, especially through the late 1800s. Obviously, census records, if anyone's ever done historic research, they know what census records look like. Check out Ancestry.com. They're now even more searchable than ever. They are fantastic, and I've used these quite a bit because they do, in some years, record street names and house numbers. On the very far left, if the census taker was very diligent, sometimes they wrote down what street they were on and what house number the house was. And I've been able to locate some families using that, and sometimes that's the only way we can locate them. Military and marriage records. This is also another great resource because military records will tell you where they lived sometimes. So when they enlisted, this will say, you know, Inez Green, the wife of Glenn Green, lived in Salem, Arkansas, which is great because I needed to prove that she was there, that she owned this piece of property for my National Register nomination. Also, marriage records give us answers to some questions that we may not have been able to answer. This marriage record here on the right is actually for a group of ex-slaves who lived in Georgia and moved to Arkansas. They moved to Arkansas in about 1880. They were married. It's a two men married sisters. And we were able to prove that they were sisters and why they came to Arkansas together, which nobody really knew why. They forgot, the family had not passed that down. We found them because one is listed right above the other. They were married the same day and probably moved pretty quickly afterwards. So this was a way we were able to fill in some gaps on a National Register nomination for a cemetery through records in Georgia happened to find on Ancestry. So the computer has made our lives so much easier in terms of research. And it's worth plugging in what you know everywhere. Newspapers, of course, I don't like running newspapers because it's long and tedious, but sometimes you find the absolute best information for National Register nominations. Of course, the top left picture, this is the downtowner in Hot Springs. Actually, I think that's in Little Rock, sorry. And then we were able to prove when it was built because we found these newspapers saying, congratulations, they're now open, and look at all these great people who had items in there, including the concrete producer and the person who, did the metal work. Bottom left, we had some diners in Arkansas. We were able to prove where they came from through newspaper articles. And of course, on the right, this is the old Democrat paper building. It's now the Threefold, I think it is, the noodle company downtown. This was them celebrating with all of their paper carriers when they opened the building. So we were able to prove when that building opened. And finally, architectural drawings. Architectural drawings don't exist for every property. Not every property is designed by an architect, but when you do find them, they're fantastic resources in terms of research. This is again that home that we were talking about, the Billings Cole House in Malvern. And we were able to prove that the architect did this building, but then came back later and added on the carport for the family as a request. So we have 2 sets of drawings for this house. We never would have known that because they looked pretty seamless. It was pretty, quote, quick after one another, but we were able to prove that with the drawings. I know I've given you a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm going to leave this slide up. This is our website, and this is our phone number and address. And I do have my business cards up here available as well. If you do have questions, please let us know. We're happy to help you start the research process or start the National Register nomination process, whatever you may have questions about. And questions?
Thank you very much, Callie. Thank you very much. And one of the things that we were putting together this year with our series of lectures is sort of the basics. Everybody always talks about the National Register of Historic Places, and there's not really always a good understanding of what it is. So last month we did architectural styles. This month it is the National Register. Even reporters, when they're talking about projects going on, they usually say like they mess it up, but nonetheless they know that it's important. And so we thought we'll just build upon it. And of course, next month on March the 14th, we are going to have a talk on tax credits. And really, the listing in the National Register is kind of the basis of almost everything. It is, of course, honorific, but it is prestigious. And we thought it was important to kind of break down what it is and talk about it. One other thing I'm going to mention before I cut you loose is that amazingly, I think many of you know that we're working on some legislation right now. We're trying to get the threshold for the tax credit lowered so that if you spend $5,000 in an owner-occupied property, you could pursue the state rehabilitation tax credits. So I've been up at the Capitol probably more than usual, and very interestingly, a representative has introduced a bill that negates local overlay districts because of an incident that happened in their jurisdiction. But those areas that are either National Register listed or locally designated districts are exempt. So in some respects, who would have known that your National Register listing or having a local district would help protect the integrity of your neighborhood? So it's kind of it's just an unusual thing. I mean, I'm appreciative that they recognized it, but I'm also still a little bit bothered, frankly, that the state would make a change to a decision that's made at the local level. Obviously, people wanted an overlay because they established it for various reasons, but nonetheless, so there's another unforeseen or unanticipated benefit to having a National Register listed area. The other thing I'm going to mention before I, again, let you go is I do have one of my board members here, Joshua Price. So if you have questions about the mission of the Quapaw Quarter Association, the QQA, please feel free to reach out to myself, of course, Shelley, or Joshua, as we're wrapping up tonight. But I would like everyone to continue to feel free to have something to eat and drink, and certainly take one of our koozies with you tonight. So this is this year's koozie with our new logo on it. And again, Callie mentioned that we have a lot of our resources at the Butler Center, and as a matter of fact, they are growing. We have people who come to us often that drop stuff off. They are moving, they're downsizing, they need to get rid of stuff, and we are, believe it or not, continue to increase the QQA collection at the Butler Center. And if we're doing research, guess what? We go over there too. That's where we have to go to our files, and it's wonderful. They are just so sharp and so wonderful that we are fortunate to have that partnership. And we also have an entire set, maybe not entire, but a good set of city directories. So if you want to know where your grandparents lived, come to our office and you can look up their name, and that's what I've done before. Figure out where my grandparents moved around from place to place. And just reach out to us and let us know if you want to come over. So again, thank you all very much for coming tonight. We look forward to seeing you next month to learn about the tax credits, which is an awesome benefit to having a National Register listed property. And I wanted to look in the brochure that Callie brought, because this building, the old paint factory, is a Sandwiching in History tour site for August 2nd. So of course, we're going to spend a lot of time in this room this year, but if you come on August 2nd, you can see the entire facility, and it is awesome. Cromwell offices are here. Hopefully they'll be able to show an apartment upstairs, and of course, Head Diner, you can visit anytime if you're interested in eating there. But this is a lovely facility. We definitely want to acknowledge the support of Cromwell for letting us have these here each month. So thank you all very much for coming again tonight. It's great to see you, and stick around, eat, drink, so we don't have to carry it back to Current Hall.